We're just going to give it a couple more minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started just for the sake of time. So my name is Dawn Johnson. I am with the Strategic Partnership Team at Turnitin, and I'm very happy to have Howard Fuchsman from Purdue University with us today to talk about Gradescope and the process that they have gone through in getting Gradescope up and running at Purdue. And you can feel free to throw questions in chat. We'll certainly leave some time at the end for Q&A, but we want this to be collaborative. So if you have questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat room, and we will monitor that as the presentation goes on. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Howard.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us. I know it's been a long day for either those of you who work today and they're just coming into this, or who've attended multiple sessions. So thank you for your time. Today we're going to talk about how we at Purdue enabled our faculty to give better quality feedback by improving their grading process. So just quickly who I am, you can see me, so you probably didn't need the picture, but I am a senior educational technology consultant here. I am part of our teaching and learning technologies group. We are not part of IT, which I like to cover. We're actually part of the online and digital learning, though we will be shifting to the provost office in about 3 weeks. So we do have a bit of a pedagogical bent when we talk to faculty about technology. So to give you a quick overview of what we're going to go through, we're going to start really from the start of the process, let you know who we are, where we sit, what our role is, go through the search and evaluation process and what those identified key benefits were. We're going to talk a little bit about how we supported Gradescope and the scanning process we implemented. And then we'll talk about the implementation, the shift in the last year or so because of COVID, and then some of the things we've learned, both some unexpected benefits and then some really wonderful faculty use cases. And then finally, we'll talk about some support available that we'd like to highlight. So we've got some goals for the session. We're really going to talk about how our search for the tool made this happened, how finding Gradescope allowed us to address some of those big complaints, speed and consistency in particular, and finally, how we use Gradescope to complement the LMS as a supplemental tool to measure student learning and to use our resources more efficiently. So who we are, I mentioned that I'm part of teaching and learning technologies. And our role at the university is sort of a compilation of a bunch of jobs. We are the folks that go find, develop, and support new technologies, whether those are internally built tools or external tools. We also are the instructional design and development group. So we provide that sort of pedagogical and technological help that faculty need on a regular basis. So in my job, I tend to spend 4 to 5 hours of my day working directly with or in support of faculty. So let's talk about how we wound up where we're at and that why I'm talking about this. So really, we had an issue on campus that our faculty were looking for better ways to provide feedback, right? They identified that feedback was part of their job that they liked the least, and they wanted better ways to give that feedback to students. They also wanted to reduce the amount of time they were spending just managing the paper process. So, 5 minutes of every class period were spent collecting papers, handing them back to students, having students come up with issues. And so they were complaining about that. And finally, they were trying to spend less time grading. When I talk to faculty, they always say they love doing their research. They like teaching. They like mentoring grad students. They like working with their colleagues, and they dislike the time they spend grading. Grading is that one pain point that's almost universal for faculty. So if we could cut the amount of time they spend doing that down so they could spend their time doing things they enjoy more or that they see more benefit in, we knew that was something that faculty really wanted. At the same time, at the institutional level, we were trying to find ways to support these different types of assessment, particularly with larger class sizes happening. So how can we provide that support as class sizes grew? And also, how do we do that without adding more resources on the labor side? So how do we do that without hiring more TAs, without hiring more graders, as resources got stretched at the university? So we went through an entire search process, and let me go through the timeline real quick and get into some more details. It actually started with some of our faculty coming to us and saying, hey, they wanted to use Gradescope. So mechanical engineering, which is our largest department on campus, started using Gradescope in 2015. And we were aware of it. We were part of their process as they started looking at integration and those sorts of options. But really, it was just happening in 1 or 2 classes. The following year, based on their feedback and based on our feedback from them, we started researching Gradescope and monitoring its usage. So we started attending sessions that Gradescope were running. We started listening to our faculty more. We started participating in that process. And finally, in 2017, we launched a full pilot. So what does that look like? When we go through a pilot, we look to identify 4 things. Security and accessibility. So does it meet the university standards? Does it integrate with our LMS system and any other systems it might interact with? In this case, we were looking at Blackboard at the time. Scalability. So if we're going to sign a contract with the tool, or if we're going to bring a tool on board, we want to make sure that it's something that either we can support or can be supported across every class, because we don't like introducing something and capping it to only certain classes. And finally, we wanted to see what sort of resources and system requirements we needed to put in place. So those are the main questions we ask whenever we go through a pilot. So we had the first pilot year, faculty from a little over a dozen large classes, and these were primarily in STEAM, so mechanical and chemical engineering, chemistry, and math, with about 25 faculty and 50 TAs. I mentioned the number of people because these were large classes that had multiple people involved in each section or in each course. These were not, one professor, one course. And what we heard from the pilot process was faculty were reporting that they were saving time with the grading and the paper handling, which was the big questions or requests that we had from them, and that they were really supportive of the tool. We have never had an experience, at least I haven't had an experience here, where we've introduced faculty at large to a new tool and they said, this is a tool we need to keep. We love this. As I always throw this quote out there, one of our senior faculty, full professor, said, please don't take this away from me. I've been teaching here for 30 years. I want to keep this tool. So we had this really great feedback, and we decided we needed to figure out, well, what do we need to do to put this in place? What do we need to do to make sure we can roll this out? So one of the big innovations here was we centralized the scanning process, and we'll talk through that. So in our realm, we thought through, how do we support our faculty and our graders if we make Gradescope work? And there's a bunch of people who are invested in that. Department level support, whether that was training the faculty, providing the resources like TAs and graders, needed to be in place. My group, Teaching and Learning Technologies, built workshops and help documentation a little bit to get faculty up and running. We also did one-on-one consultations and sat in on classes as they used it. Gradescope was a fantastic resource because they provided videos and help documentation and regular workshops and seminars that faculty could attend. And I'll actually give you a link to some of that later because I think it's worthwhile if you're interested. And finally, we brought in our instructional data processing group, IDP, because faculty were already working with them and we saw a place that they could support the rollout of Gradescope. So who are they? Adding IDP became really important because IDP were the folks that faculty already knew. These are the folks that handled things like Scantron processing, course evaluations. They also helped with proctoring. So they already had a role with classes when it came to assessment. They're also centrally located on campus. They're in one of our main buildings right in the middle, and faculty knew who they were. And they were looking for ways to better support faculty because Scantron usage has been dropping off. As we talk to faculty about assessment, we know that multiple choice assessment, not ideal way to measure knowledge retention, whether to grade holistically, all those things that faculty are being encouraged to do don't happen with Scantron. So they were looking for a way to support the faculty as Scantron use dropped off. So they offered those benefits to our faculty. The big thing is, by going to a centralized scanning office, we had one office that had the equipment and staff who could start doing that mass scanning. It streamlined the process and it took away that labor cost that department staff or TAs would normally do to get items scanned into Gradescope. So, I always tell the story, when faculty started seeing what that scanning process did for them, it was a revelation. They went from having to take home big stacks of papers, doing all the grading by paper, and getting them back to the students. And suddenly they were able to just drop them off at our IDP office. IDP scanned them in for them, and they did all their grading in Gradescope. The story I'd like to tell is I was working with a professor. He's a full professor here, been here for 30 some years. First time I walked into his office to talk Gradescope, he showed me the empty shelf above his desk. Said that was the first time he'd ever had an empty shelf that far into the semester because Gradescope exams were being processed. So let's talk about their success. The big thing with their success was that they were able to scale up quickly. And so faculty were bringing exams to IDP. IDP would scan those in using scanners, would match them to the correct students in Gradescope, and then tell professors, your stuff's ready to grade. The key there to faculty was once they dropped off those papers, they never had to touch them again. Those papers sat at IDP for the full year until the grade appeal period was over and then would be destroyed. But in the meantime, the professors have that scanned in version that they're actually grading and giving back to students. And so you could see here, it was night and day. We went from handling a couple of exams a semester to nearly 200. The big number there is that 172,000 scanned pages. And that was labor that didn't have to be done at the department level, didn't have to be done by TAs, but were done by experts who knew how to scan these things cleanly, were doing it in volume, and were doing it quicker than anybody else on the campus could do. And we really saved a lot of time and effort on that. The other thing that IDP offered, I apologize, I hit the button soon, was that they could provide clear guidelines for faculty on how to submit their thing, get it formatted correctly. And we noticed that having that early intervention in the process made it better for faculty because they had a better sense of what they needed to do when they wrote their exams, when they uploaded their exams. So now that we've talked about the scanning process and the pilot, let's talk about some of the key benefits that our faculty gave us as feedback from when we first launched Gradescope. So the big one, and the one that really is the game changer, is this rubric-based grading. Rubric-based grading allows faculty to lay out sort of what the deductions would be for any particular assignment and simply click the button for how that rubric item, for that rubric applies to that student. So in the case of this sample, this is a 50-point question with a ton of 1, 2, 3-point deductions. And the professor, when they went to grade it, or the TA, more importantly, when they went to grade it, only had to click the matching issues that they saw in the student paper. Now, Gradescope allows for both positive and negative rubrics, but we've seen primarily as a university, our faculty tend to do negative rubrics. You know, particularly in the science, technology, engineering, that's how they've always graded, and Gradescope allows them to still do it. The other part of the rubric-based grading is that's responsive to changes. So as faculty grade, if they see an issue that keeps coming up and they want to change the value of it, so they want to say, hey, half my class made this mistake, I'm going to drop this down to only a 1-point deduction, they can change it and it will correct on every student who's already been graded. So no more having to go back through the stack of papers to change the grade values. The other big benefit, and really where we saw a lot of the time savings, was in what we call horizontal grading and what Gradescope calls collaborative grading. So Gradescope is laid out to allow professors, and actually by default force professors, to grade horizontally. So instead of grading one student's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, one professor or one TA will grade all of question 1 in a row, then all of question 2 in a row, all of question 3 in a row. Real benefits to that because it allows you to split the grading load without having to worry about duplication of efforts, without having to share those papers around where everybody's rotating in a stack. And this led to multiple improvements in the grading process. For one, we have more consistent feedback, right? Because if the same person's grading everybody's questions, they're more likely to have the same scale in their head of what's a major error versus what's a minor error, those sorts of things. The other thing it did is it allowed professors in particular to sort of monitor who was doing the grading and how much grading they were doing. So they could see which TA was grading, which TAs were grading harder than others, and really provide some oversight in the grading process. And finally, the other savings we saw in time savings and frustration savings we saw during the pilot was in the regrade request. So Gradescope has an internal regrade request process, and we've provided some supplemental information to faculty to make it go better. What students can do if the professor enables regrades is go in, highlight the question they want regraded, and put in a reason. We've provided faculty with some standard language to put in their syllabi to provide some guidance for what sort of language or what sort of reasoning that students should put in. And then the professor can come in, click on review, look at what the student's reason is, and make those decisions. Again, because of that responsive rubric, if the professor sees a bunch of questions on the same rubric item, they can choose, even after they've graded and given back the papers, to change the point value in bulk. Or maybe they notice that they took points off for something that the students have said, hey, we never covered this. They can just make that rubric item a 0. And so they don't have to go back through all of the papers and they don't have to go review everybody who made the same complaint. The other part of this is because it's hosted inside of Gradescope, professors can simply go in at the end of the regrade period and see all the regrades at one time. No more hundreds of emails, no more students lined up outside of your office door after you give back an exam. In fact, from talking to my faculty, most of them tend to give back exams in the evenings or over the weekends now in Gradescope intentionally, so students aren't lined up outside their door, particularly as we think about COVID. So let's talk about the rollout and implementation process. So we found some benefits. We've got a scanning process in place, and we're ready to sign on. So we've signed a contract to launch in fall of 2018, and we had about 60 courses use it that first semester. In those 60 courses, we're about 9,000 total students. So mostly larger size classes with a few one-offs in our classes. Most of that got used in our sciences and used for exams only. So they were coming to us simply, 2-3 times a year to say, help us scan this in, get our stuff in, so we don't have to deal with the paper process of exams. Students in courses started reporting back to us almost immediately that they felt that their grades were getting back sooner. Now, I don't know for sure that they were, or if it's just the perception that they were. But again, like I mentioned, if a professor gave back an exam over the weekend instead of waiting till the following Monday, the students felt that they were getting graded quicker, even if they weren't actually being graded quicker, they were just getting those quicker. And the other thing we heard from students was, while we were expecting to hear about the grading speed, there was actually the clarity and consistency of the rubric-based feedback that students really appreciated. One of the biggest complaints students often have is that they don't understand, why they lost the points, and Gradescope makes that incredibly explicit. So we did a bunch of work to make sure this was a successful rollout when we introduced the tool. The biggest one is we had regular campus-wide and department workshops to promote the use, whether that was a how-to workshop that was open to any faculty or TA that want to attend, or a customized workshop where a faculty could come and say, I need to use Gradescope for this. Can you come meet with me and my TAs to get us up and running? We also worked with our communications group to get those regular notifications, regular information about how to do things out to faculty. So faculty were seeing it constantly. We saw this as a beneficial tool. We want to make sure it got in front of as many faculty as possible. And finally, we partnered with one of our faculty over in engineering education, Ed Berger, who created a series of recordings and ran a workshop for us on how to build better rubrics. So, one of the things we were hearing from our faculty were, I'm not used to building a formal rubric. That's not what I was trained. A lot of our new faculty come in, particularly in the sciences, who haven't had teaching experience, have only had a TA experience where they graded off of somebody else's rubric. And so working with faculty to develop this sort of resource allowed faculty to be more confident when they were building and deploying those rubrics. I should say that Ed really pushed for positive rubrics, where students were rewarded for demonstrating knowledge rather than having deductions for making mistakes. And I believe if you check the chat, there should be a link to those videos, and they are still hosted on our website. So growth here was exponential. By the end of the first year, we started bringing on extra departments: biology, statistics, AAE, chemistry. Those were departments that had massive classes or big managed classes. So these were, one course coordinator with 12 sections that they were overseeing. And so these were the folks that were seeing Gradescope as a huge benefit after that first year. We also started seeing in fall of 2019, our first online courses use it. These were classes that hadn't ever done on-paper assessment before. So they'd done everything digitally, which meant they usually relied on short answer or multiple choice. But now they were using Gradescope to do digital, or to do paper assessment, have students submit it, and do their grading on the digital platform. This allowed for them to do more comprehensive assessment. We also saw Gradescope work to continue to develop their tool, which allowed us to have a more robust integration, particularly the ability to push grades back, which was a huge want from our faculty, so they didn't have to export and import these things manually. And finally, we saw real benefit in our electrical engineering program because they launched a MicroMaster. So this was a high volume program for non-students for the most part that needed a platform to be able to collect written work and grade it quickly with a low staff count. So having Gradescope in place allowed us to actually start expanding the MicroMasters program, which obviously is a financial benefit to the department. So things were rolling pretty well. We were up to about 90 classes, I think it was. I think they're on the next slide. And suddenly we had this COVID happened. We had to shift everything to online in about a week and a half. And Gradescope was the tool we looked for to help us in this emergency. We had to change our paper handling processes. We lost TAs because they couldn't get into the country and they didn't want to take courses online, or they couldn't do their research here, so they took a year off. And so we had to do a lot. And Gradescope was absolutely the responsive tool. So I mentioned we were about 90 at the end of spring of 2019. Fall of 2019, we had jumped up to about 200 courses because it was popular and was being used in some of those large multi-section courses. But within about 2 weeks of when we shifted to online, we doubled that number. So we had 432 courses, and more importantly, that shift meant that faculty stopped thinking of it as an exam tool and started thinking of it as a tool for everything. So those 432 classes combined in a half semester for most of them used Gradescope for over 4,000 assignments. So this was allowing them to do the sort of work that they wanted to do normally at volume. The other thing happened is Gradescope rolled out a new online assignment tool that allowed us to do things like having an assignment that included both multiple choice and short answer and those longer, more holistic questions, and also allowed us to have a timer on those assignments, which was crucial for integrity reasons, particularly because obviously over this last year, we've had a lot of concern about academic integrity and the shift to online. So that was the emergency semester. And then we had the summer. So the summer, we actually had time to start planning, and most of our courses moved to a hybrid or high flex model. So that meant the professors were either meeting with students once a week and then their other meeting was online, or in a lot of cases, meeting with half the students one day and half the students the other day, which meant faculty now had to manage an increased workload, right? They had to build a course that could be both delivered to face-to-face students and online students, plus manage working with those students that might have been in quarantine or were sick or had other issues. And so the workload was higher on faculty. So we went and looked and said, what sort of additional pedagogical training do we need to provide? Whether that's instructional development assistance, whether that's support hours for faculty to make sure that they can accomplish this in this coming year, which was last year, sorry. And Gradescope became a major part of that process. It was highlighted in our Impact X faculty training program over the summer. And was part of the communication from the Office of the Provost talking to faculty about how to do better assessment in this new environment. And we jumped. I mean, our volume went through the roof. Over the last 2 semesters, we've run about 700 courses each semester and 38,000 students. Those are butts in seats through Gradescope each semester. So it's had not only has it had a major impact on the faculty, but also the students have gotten used to it, have seen it as a better tool. And it's at the point now where students go to their professors and go, what you're doing now is a harder process than it would be if we were just submitting through Gradescope. So now faculty are coming to me off of recommendations from students and TAs who are recommending the tool. The other big challenge we had over the summer was we shifted our LMS. So we transitioned from Blackboard to Brightspace and added on that labor load to faculty that had to learn an entirely new system to do assessment, to lay out their courses, to do all those design things. Gradescope really helped here because they have a very clear, simple interface. And more importantly to me, they make really good support videos and instructions that made it easy for faculty to onboard with it. So what wound up happening is faculty looked to Gradescope as a supplemental tool to the assessment tools already in Brightspace. They wanted to do an assignment, but give students a timer. Gradescope was the option. They wanted to do exams that involved more math, more calculations, more things that they could grade holistically, and Gradescope became the option. It really became a tool that allowed them to go beyond what the LMS could offer and do better assessment. So where do we see benefits besides those I already talked about? The first thing is data collection. I already mentioned this a little bit about faculty evaluation and reflection. The faculty were able to see how grading was happening, what people were going through as they went through it. And Gradescope gives you a really nice layout of what the grade spread is for the assignment, for the exam, for whatever. This helps, again, ensuring better grade consistency across sections and graders. You know, if you see one section has been graded a lot harder than another, you can step in and intervene maybe right away. It develops your TAs as graders and really as future colleagues, because they're getting used to thinking about rubrics. They're getting used to thinking about how to assess papers. The other places, though, is it helped us get that data that we couldn't get elsewhere. So being able to get that assignment metadata on how students were doing, huge benefit for our departments that were going through accreditation processes. It also allowed departments to track students across multiple assignments because they could download both the rubric and the student submission in a paired way. The other thing, data-wise, that we worked with Gradescope to get was, when needed, we were able to get IP data. So if a professor found their exam on Chegg, they could request that data from Chegg, request the data from Gradescope, and we could compare to see if there were issues that we needed to address. This is a huge benefit, and again, this era of heightened attention on academic integrity. So I want to show what this looks like on a question level. So you can see it actually breaks out the grading by question and tells you, how did students do on average each question. And then finally, once we dig into the question, we are able to pull the rubric data to see which rubric items were marked the most, the least, as we went through. This was incredibly popular to faculty because they could, at a glance, go, my students are struggling on this issue, my students are struggling on this issue, I need to add a question about it to the next quiz, I need to make sure we cover it again in the next lecture. If they click through these, if you click on the name of one of the rubric items, it will actually give you the list of students who made that mistake. And so they could reach out to those students directly and say, hey, you should come to tutoring, or you should come to office hours because you struggled on this question. And we need to make sure you know this for the next exam. So this sort of data isn't available in the LMS and really wasn't available in paper exams unless they went and did a ton of work. This actually led to some of our faculty thinking about using Gradescope to start collecting data for big research projects. So if they're doing any sort of pedagogical research, this gives them those proofs that they need. So I want to walk through, in our last few minutes before questions, some faculty use cases, because I think thinking about how faculty use the tool can be incredibly valuable. So this is one of our first courses that came on board after the pilot. Was one of our large computer science courses. So I mentioned that this is a multiple managed section. So there's one course coordinator, and then each section has its own instructor, whether that's a TA or a fixed term faculty, who actually run the course. So the professors are able to teach the course in their own way, but they share a common exam. So every student takes the same exam at the same time in the evening. And then they're graded historically in a group. So they would each get a stack of 50 exams, 80 exams, take them home and grade them. They wanted, though, to make sure that the grading was being consistent across all those sections. And they also had their own administrative resources that allowed them to do things like scanning that same night that the exam was taken, so they were ready to start grading immediately. So what we were able to do with them using Gradescope is to put all of those students into a single Gradescope section for the exam. So they gave out the exam, they collected it, they took it to their own scanners, they scanned it in that evening at 9, 10 o'clock at night after the exam was given in the evening, and they could start grading almost immediately as soon as those things were scanned in. This allowed them to split the grading load across every instructor, which meant each instructor or TA was only required to grade 1 or 2 questions. They reported to me that their time for grading that paper was cut in half. Most of the grading was done in the first 24 hours after getting the exam back. And then we were able to sync the courses to Brightspace and let them push back the grades to the students in each section one by one. So there was a time savings, there was improved consistency, and a clearer path to getting the work done. The next use case, very different. I have a professor, actually 2 that I work with, who teach a course with students in multiple countries, primarily in West Africa. So this is a pharmacy course, a molecular pharmacology course, actually, and they had some concerns. Their students came to the US for 1 week. They went to Africa 1 week every semester. But otherwise, the students were often in their hometowns or working in rural locations where their internet wasn't consistent. And so they really struggled taking exams on the LMS. Because when they took it on the LMS, they had to log in, they had to stay on the LMS the entire time, and they had to then upload it while maintaining that connection. Gradescope allowed them to download the assignment, work on it on their own paper, take a picture, and then submit it when they had internet connectivity. And their exercises included not just problem solving, so things that they were doing on paper, but also like setting up their own lab experiments. So they were doing field work and were using the image upload tool in Gradescope to collect images of the work they were doing and submitting those as if they were pages of their assignment. The instructor was also able to download and grade them. So he could, when he landed, if he was going to be out and about for a few days when he went to visit, he could print out or download the PDFs to his computer, grade them, and then upload the grades when he had the connectivity. And again, because the students didn't need to access the LMS to get to Gradescope, they could go to Gradescope directly. It reduced that one extra step that, and again, in a limited internet environment, was really useful. And finally, I want to talk about data collection. So you may hear me rave a little bit about the data stuff because I am a big old nerd when it comes to what data we can get out. But this is because our faculty came to us and said, we need metadata on the grading of testing and assignments. This was a large chemistry class, one of the intro level courses, and they wanted to be able to see how is grading happening from test to test, from TA to TA, and more importantly, for their accreditation, could we match the students with multiple assignments? So could we look at what student 1 did on exam 1, 2, and 3 and compare that to the rubric? So Gradescope did all that for us. The statistics provided the data on the rubric items per question basis to allow for that sort of assessment level. They could track who graded what to do the personnel evaluation. They could look at how they graded, and they could collect and download those student submissions with the matching rubric and save those for when they wanted to come back and review those either across one course or even across multiple courses that used Gradescope. So they could look and see what that student did in a 100 level class, a 200 level class, a 300 level course. So that was a huge game changer for those departments. So what does that mean for us looking forward? I mentioned that Gradescope's become a big part of our pedagogical training. As we lay out our training for the summer, we're including things that we haven't done before, like better assessment and better feedback. This allows us to do sessions that encourage and train faculty on writing better questions, more open-ended questions, which obviously leads to a better academic integrity, also better assessment of student learning. It's become part of our faculty training. So when faculty go through Impact, which is a grant-funded program where faculty actually get money to go through a course redesign, Gradescope is being pushed out to them. And finally, we've started working with our faculty to build roundtables or panels where we ask the faculty to come together and share their best practices. What have you learned? What have you not learned? Currently, I'm working with faculty to collect their syllabus language around Gradescope. So we can look and see, who's got some good language for how they explain the process to students. What can we learn from that? And so we've been able to start doing that. Faculty have also reported that they've been able to reassign TAs or use TAs for other tasks. This is really important in some of those lab courses, particularly in this environment where we have twice as many lab sections for a course because of social distancing. So that TA that used to have to spend 8 hours a week grading is now spending 4 or 5 hours a week grading and is able to spend 3 extra hours setting up the labs. And we're also mentioning, and I've sort of talked about all of this, is looking for new ways to use Gradescope. So whether that's documenting those lab processes with images, so professors don't have to circulate the room doing labs, whether we use the auto grader and the programming assignment, which we really haven't taken much advantage of yet, or those professors who are starting to put in IRB requests focused on using Gradescope data to do academic research. And finally, the conversation that we're having most often right now with faculty is thinking about designing exams and assignments to better work with Gradescope. So they've used Gradescope for what they did before, but now they're thinking, well, I like Gradescope, I want to keep using Gradescope. How can I redesign things to match what Gradescope offers? So we're at the question point, and while those come in, I am going to jump over. I want to mention two things about Gradescope. They've been a fantastic partner for us, but I do encourage folks to either check out one of their workshops that gets more in details about what the tool is, because I obviously was talking more about our process. And secondly, they recently did a user summit where they had faculty's lead sessions on how they were using the tool. And if you've got faculty interested, or if you're interested in how you could really implement it either at scale or in specific ways, I would highly recommend checking out some of those recordings because they're phenomenal. And hearing from faculty talk about the tool is often more valuable than listening to me. So I'm glad you are here listening to me. So I will go back and now say, were there any questions?
Thanks, Howard. Yeah, we've got one in the chat. What types of courses work best with Gradescope? For instance, do you think it might work with accounting courses?
So I have, I believe, 3 courses using it in accounting. There might be others that I haven't paid attention to, but we are using it in accounting. Really, any course where you are focused more on holistic grading. So it's not going to help you in a history course where you just want them to do short answer identification of years, things that an LMS can auto grade. But where you're really looking to show that they understand a process, that they understand how X leads to Y equals to Z, and you want to grade that way rather than just the final answer, that's really where it's at. My College of Business in general has been a big user in the last year, partly because they want to do more holistic grading and the LMS just wasn't matching what they needed to do. I know we have economic courses, agronomy, accounting, but also I meant to say ag econ, not agronomy, because those are 2 different things. But otherwise, we're primarily seeing it being used in College of Science, which is chemistry, bio, math, statistics, College of Engineering, a little bit in the humanities. I've got actually a really wonderful professor who's been using it in human development and family sciences, and she uses it just for quick things where she can put in a short rubric to evaluate like reading responses the day of. So she can put a question up on the board, the students can write it out on their paper or type it in, upload it, and she can start grading with a really simple rubric and give them some basic points for those quick responses.
Great, thanks for that. Another question, what would you recommend to someone who wants to get started but isn't quite sure where to go?
So first thing I'll tell you is to attend one of those intro sessions. They are absolutely phenomenal. Once you get set up with an account, Gradescope provides a number of really great tutorials for getting started, which can be really useful. Otherwise, I would just, feel free to reach out to me. We can have a conversation, or reach out to Gradescope, help@Gradescope. And again, I cannot rave about Olga and her team more for getting folks onboarded. Great.
Can you talk a little bit about what leaders, you've talked a little bit about departments, but what leaders were critical for the successful rollout of this?
Sure. So, in order to launch this successfully, we really needed to have all of our stakeholders on board. And that included our group, Teaching and Learning Technologies, the Center for Instructional Excellence, who provide that pedagogical training and do a lot of the new faculty onboarding. And at the department level, we asked for departments to identify courses that might benefit from that, professors who were struggling getting their grading done, because department heads were seeing that feedback that professors were getting, but also to work with us to do things like help and information sessions and custom workshops. So department heads and heads of the colleges were really valuable. And then I mentioned IDP before, and they've been absolutely essential. They actually provide, if a department like computer science wants to do their own scanning, they have worked with IDP to set up their own website for request and guidelines, and to train their people on how to get the scanning done well. One of the tricks that IDP started doing, and I don't know if they learned it from Gradescope or not, but they actually chopped the edge off of every exam before they scan it, which meant it saved them a ton of time from having to remove the staples and get those all in, but also not have to worry about papers coming in unstapled. So again, once those things are scanned in, they're in the records. And so really those were our stakeholders to launch things.
Great. I'm going to just throw out one more question for you, Howard. You've talked a lot about the positive feedback that you've received from faculty and students, but have you experienced any faculty pushback? And if so, sort of what that biggest pushback is?
So the answer is the short answer is no. The long answer is a little bit. So I say the short answer is no because we've yet to have a faculty member start using it and then come to me and go, this isn't working for me. Once a faculty member starts using it, not only do they keep using it, they tend to wind up referring some of their colleagues over. But there are places where Gradescope hasn't worked, or the labor costs, because again, you're having to build a rubric, you're having to set up the assignment in the system. And particularly for smaller classes, 15, 20 students, that time to get the whole rubric built out is not worth it. They would rather just grade on paper like they always did. It saves time. And so that's really where we've gotten some pushback. But as we've moved due to COVID online, even those courses have come back to it because it just made their lives easier. But you can see by our growth path that it really has had very little pushback from our faculty. When it comes to students, it's the same thing. So I see every ticket that comes into our queue about Gradescope this semester, and I just pulled it yesterday, Tuesday. We had 4 students with questions about Gradescope, 3 of whom said they couldn't upload, and it turned out that they were just doing something incorrectly. And the 4th one claimed that Gradescope was losing his assignments, but we worked with Gradescope and they were able to track that the student had never logged in to Gradescope during the times that he said he had.
Great. I think we just got another question in the chat. When you say rubric, do you mean in the more traditional sense, like you might see in an LMS, or is there something more comprehensive needed to use with Gradescope?
So Gradescope is really built to do these point-based rubrics, and I went back to the slide where I had that, and just getting this stuff all entered in took some work. One of the places, for example, that it requires a little extra work is, let's say you deduct 2 points for each math error that a student makes. Well, you can't click the same item more than once. So you'd have to have like an item for math error 1, another item for math error 2, another item for math error 3, and then you'd click all 3 of them to do 3 deductions. A lot of our professors weren't doing this. They weren't purposefully grading. They were going through, they're looking at it and going, well, this looks like it should be 25 out of 50. They might circle a few points. They might have a general rubric outline that they were working with, but this sort of comprehensive point by point does take a little extra work. The other thing, though, that I've heard from faculty is that they're starting to take advantage of these rubrics to give better feedback. So not only could you, for example, say state 2, you have wrong, the temperature, but some professors will even put into the rubric language here, review question 4 from chapter 5 to see how this should have been done. So they can actually put even more detail and give students that feedback. But it does mean that there's more work, just the data entry part.
Great. Thanks, Howard. I think that we are about at our time. And so thank you for the questions. And Howard, thank you so much for taking us through the journey that Purdue went through to get Gradescope up and running. Thank you to everyone who joined today, and everyone have a great afternoon, and hopefully the rest of the conference is nice.